Hello. I wanted to talk to you today about the AIDS epidemic because it devastated the gay community and such a horrible, horrible thing. It also caused a lot of discrimination against people who had AIDS. People were afraid of them. It happened on Ronald Reagan's watch as president. He became president in 1981. And we started to learn more about AIDS in 82, 83. The weird thing is, the world was very afraid of AIDS. It was this big unknown mystery. And what really hurt was Ronald Reagan refused to even mention the word in the first 3 years of his office. Fortunately, he had a Surgeon General named C. Everett Koop, who felt it was his responsibility to talk about AIDS, to warn people, to figure out how to avoid it, how was it contracted, and all this kind of. He was really a good person. So he helped establish the groundwork on what to do and what not to do regarding the transmission of AIDS. He did surveys of gay people. And he found out some interesting things that even surprised him. For example, he noted that 7% of gay people shared the same toothbrush. It was just all trying to figure out all the little things, what kinds of sex people with AIDS practiced, everything from foods, from where they went to the club activity to sanitation, all kinds of things. And we learned about patient zero, and it could have been in 82 or 83, where the medical profession, through enough tracing of people who contracted AIDS, to find out where they got it, and where that person got it, and where the person before them got it. And it turned out, I don't know if I take this to the bank, but what was reported was patient zero was a very attractive young man who worked for the airlines. He was an airline steward. He was blonde, blue-eyed, nice build, very friendly, and very sexually active. And before AIDS, people didn't use condoms. And in the early 80s, not everybody knew what it was, and it wasn't until a few years later we found out that it was contracted by people using needles and people engaging in sex, primarily anal sex. So this patient zero was such a good carrier of the virus because he had unprotected sex, unlimited sex, every place he went, different countries, until he got very sick and died. So he was dubbed as patient zero, and we learned a lot about the spreading of AIDS through studying his life and so on. The first thing we did in Long Beach, and I always talk about Long Beach, California, because that's where I grew up, and that's where I live, and that's where most of my gay activism took place. And working in the AIDS community was no exception. The first thing that we did in Long Beach, when I say we, I mean the gay community, we started AIDS hospice houses. A person or a organization would come together and buy a specific house, usually an older house, that was 5 or 6 bedrooms. They were hard to find, but they were out there. And they used these hospice houses to house people with AIDS. There was no fee to people who couldn't afford it. And a lot of us in the gay community would do fundraisers for these hospice houses. And there were about 5 that I was aware of. I know one was started by the Catholic Church, and the other started by just individuals who were very interested and concerned and were able to help. And I hosted fundraisers in my backyard in Long Beach where I lived, And we had silent auctions and all kinds of things, activities to raise funds for these houses. A few years later, in about 1985, the gay community started what's called Project Ahead. And I think that stands for AIDS, Health, Education, and Delivery. And one of the programs under Project Ahead was a hospital visitation program. We tried to get people to visit patients in the hospital because many of them did not have any visitors. Many of them were, their families were afraid, even their friends were afraid, even their gay friends were afraid. And so it was just a lonely, sad thing, because these people felt, and properly so, that they were going to die. In the 80s, there was no treatment. We did have AZT, which came about a little bit later, but anybody who contracted AIDS in the early 80s and mid 80s, they died. In the hospital visitation program, which I joined in 1986, and I participated for, I think it was 6 years, I would go to the gay center in Long Beach on Saturday, and we had professional medical people there, nurses there, who would train us on such things as death and dying, how to be an active listener, how to be safe. And I took these, the course lasted 6 weeks, but it was like every Saturday for 6 weeks, and maybe it was 5 or 6 hours on a Saturday. So there was a lot of information there that was very helpful to me and to everybody who participated. So we have in Long Beach 4 hospitals, at least at that time, one closed. And I was assigned to St. Mary's. And it was actually a friend of mine, Bob Womack, who told me about this program because he was already in it as a hospital visitor, and he got me involved. I also worked on all the anti-gay violence programs and things like that, but AIDS was very important. I looked around after about that time, 1986, so many of my friends died, so many. It's something that I never recovered from. I just miss those people, friends. I don't really know what to say about it. It was very sad. I was assigned to St. Mary's Hospital in Long Beach, and I visited every Thursday. Thursday was the day that I was assigned. Other people had Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and all the rest. So we had 7 people on our team to visit 1 day a week. And I calculated in doing that for 6 years to be well over 1,000 people, 1,000 visits. It was very difficult to do. And sometimes I'd have this full day of visits. Not a full day. It would probably take a couple hours, 3 hours to do these visits. And I'd drive home crying. It was very tough. I remember this one case where this fellow was dying. His words, he thought he's dying. And he wanted to talk to me. And he asked me what religion I was. And I said, I'm Roman Catholic. And he says, I was never baptized. I always wanted to be Roman Catholic. So I said, well, I can have a priest come in. You can talk to them, or, whatever. They'll probably be here in a few days. They'll set up something, and I'm sure they'll be glad to baptize you. And he said, Jack, I may not make it. And so he asked me to baptize him. If you're Roman Catholic in good standing, which I certainly was, you're allowed to baptize people. So I just put my fingers in his water cup and made the sign of the cross and said, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The look on his face was amazing. He went from tension to peace. He just smiled. I left. And I never saw him again. The people that were in the hospitals were not treated very well by, they're treated well by the staff, but not by visitors. I know in one case, a Catholic priest went to visit somebody to give communion on a Sunday, and he refused to go into the room. He took the host and he sort of flipped it on the bed for the fellow to pick up and take the host. That was really awful. And I should tell you that in this hospital visitation program and hospital protocol, people who visit AIDS patients do not need caps and gowns and gloves to go in there. There is no transmission of AIDS to the visitors. There just isn't it. You can touch them, they can touch you, and they can cough or whatever. I mean, it's all okay. You're not going to catch AIDS. So I always, and here was a priest who I guess just wasn't educated. He was afraid to go into the room. I know that on some occasions, maybe the newer or part-time hospital staff, instead of bringing the tray of food into the patient, they would leave it on the floor outside the room. Ridiculous, just ridiculous. That person was fired because she didn't want to go in the room. So, that was just awful. I visited this one young man. I think he was probably about 25 years old. And he was okay to visit. I mean, I got his name on my list to visit. But when I knocked on the door and opened it, he had company. And we're not supposed to disturb people when they have company. But it was obvious to me that this was his mom and dad. I don't know why, it just seemed that way. And they were wearing a hairnet cap, complete hazard suits, gloves. I guess I don't blame people for that. I mean, people were afraid of AIDS. And I wasn't going to interrupt their visit, so I said to the parents, I won't interrupt you. I just want to say hi to your son and then leave. And they said, okay. Yeah. So, of course, I'm just wearing like I'm wearing now, no gloves or anything. I go in and I lean down. And I give him a hug. He felt so revived. It's just hard to talk about it. But I will end with one interesting story. And one of the last visits I had was to a fellow named John. And he's been in and out of the hospital. He was pretty sick. And I went again to knock on the door and opened it, and he had a young man visiting him. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, I'm not supposed to. I'll see you next time. And I closed the door. And I thought to myself, I don't know why, but the guy doing the visiting was just a real cute guy. And little did I realize that I met him several months later, and he became my husband. And when that happened, I didn't remember seeing him there until he reminded me, I saw you. You came to visit my husband who died of AIDS. That was just so neat. He remembered it, and I didn't remember it, but that memory is very precious to me. So, I'm sorry if I have trouble talking about these issues sometimes, but it's important that people understand what the AIDS epidemic was and still is. Today, a lot of young people, especially, do not observe safer sex practices. I don't know why. Maybe they don't see the devastation that I saw in the 1980s and 90s. Here in the year 2021, we don't really talk about AIDS. And so they're just not aware of it, or if they're aware of it, they just don't care, or they think there's some treatment now. But it's deadly. It's a very serious disease. And I hope everyone engages in safe, or we say safer sex practices. Thank you for listening.